Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Tom Benson might have liked to see some of his family members traded to Seattle, too, in this week when the Saints made news on the field and in the courts. Standing on a different court are the Pelicans, who moved into playoff contention. We'll be looking at these stories tonight, plus scrutinizing the state budget, ongoing corruption investigations, and the plight of a man who was wrongfully imprisoned. Starting for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, The New Orleans Advocate. Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. And we're going to go right on over to Jeff to start off and just to sort of catch us up on the continuing Benson saga. There was a little bit of movement this week in court. And then also some other information had been released that you had written about in terms of what was going on within the family.
Yeah, I think we're going to have this going on for a few weeks. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. The volleying back and forth of lawsuits, both in Texas and here in New Orleans. This week, Tom Benson and his legal team sued basically to have the trustee, Bobby Rosenthal, blocked from not executing what they've tried to do with his estates in Texas. And I think that that remains to be seen how that plays out. But basically, what he wants to be able to do is transfer these teams to his wife, Gail. They've tried to block the fact that his trustee has blocked that. They're trying to get that pushed through.
And that was filed in federal court, so it's in yet another arena.
Exactly. And I think that as far as here, where we're at here, there's of course a lawsuit that's been filed basically questioning his mental capacity to not only execute these moves with the team, but also his health in general. And I think that they're in the process of having medical evaluations by 3 different medical examiners being conducted by him. That will be turned in to the judge. He will make a determination on whether he feels like he can either throw the case out or whether it can go forward. So I think really on both those fronts, we've still got a long ways to go as far as where it's going to go.
Jeff, you broke a story a couple of weeks ago about an incident where Rita LeBlanc reportedly at the Superdome shook up or had a shaking incident with Gail Benson. Is that something that, I believe your sources where we said a couple of people within the Saints organization, is this something that the Saints organization people have been seeing a lot of?
Well, not to the point of it getting physical.
Yeah.
And this happened at a Saints game in front of dozens of people in Tom Benson's suite with a lot of his inner circle there. It was obviously very embarrassing for him, disappointing. And I think to some degree, although Saints people there, my sources there say it was not a last straw, I think it clearly was. I mean, 6 days later is when he sent the letter basically cutting off his heirs and this series of events to cut them out of his estate. So I think clearly the relationship between Gail and the family had devolved so much that he felt like he had to do something. Now on the other side, I would say that the 3 R's, Renee, Rita, and Ryan, would say that they were led to this point because this relationship had been dissolving for so long, over a long period of time, that they felt like he was being kept from them. And that's what the origin of the confrontation was why are we not being allowed to see our father or grandfather?
And they say that they were not aware of the medical procedure and how he was doing.
Correct.
The knee procedure.
He's had, I think, it's either 6 or 7 different procedures after he had a knee operation. He had a lot of complications from it. So a lot of these were minor procedures. Look, no procedure when you're 87 years old is minor to some degree, but there were a series of them, and that was the source of their I guess, dismay, is that they were not informed by anybody in the Benson family. It was instead Dennis Lauscha, the president, that informed them. And I think that illustrates how far this relationship had kind of devolved.
But they also released a statement, they being the 3 R's, Renee, Rita, and Ryan LeBlanc, stating that they have nothing but the best interest and concern of their father, grandfather at heart, and also that of the New Orleans Saints and the Pelicans and the community of New Orleans, that they want to stay in New Orleans.
And that's the first time we've heard from them throughout this entire saga, they've hired a PR firm, which I think was a good move. And I do believe we're going to be hearing a little more from them in the future because this thing's going to play out. There's going to be volleys back and forth. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
But isn't that a clear sign that this had deteriorated over some time in that he didn't just say he wanted them out of his business operations, but he said he didn't want to communicate with them ever again?
Right, and that's the one thing that I can't wrap my head around a little bit in this whole thing is, okay, if you don't believe Rita's fit to run the team, if you feel like she was falling out of favor internally, I understand that. I think a lot of people can understand that. But the fact that you would write a letter basically saying you never want to see your only surviving child and your 2 grandchildren ever again, ban them from your businesses, does seem a little bit irrational, and I can understand probably that's where the 3 R's were coming from.
And plus, it was only Rita who's alleged to have had this confrontation, really. I mean, why is he banning Ryan or Renee? The other thing that came out this week was these documents showing that just a few months ago, Benson was proceeding with the plans to transfer the ownership to the 3 R's. So even though he's had this contention that it's been deteriorating for a long time, and that Rita's not competent to run the franchise, it seemed like until relatively recently that's where things were headed.
Right. No, just a year ago, I wrote that he had changed his succession plan.
But even more recently, that some documents came out this week that showed they were proceeding on that path. So.
Right.
But the Benson team said that was just sort of standard response to the NFL.
If Judge Reese concurs that there is no legal evidence to say that this man is mentally incompetent, then does that strengthen his case to the point? I mean, what has to happen for this case to end and to be resolved? And is that a key decision right there?
With what the judge is going to
I mean, I think that's one important thing, but I think maybe this proceeding that he's gone to federal court in is even more important. But I've always wondered if that's the more crucial case.
Well, certainly, the thing is, it's in a number of courts now, 3 different courts, and as you said, we're going to be hearing about this for several weeks to come.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, we have to move on over to Gordon, and something that we keep hearing about too is public corruption and investigations, and news about it this week in a couple of different areas involving a few different people.
Yeah, and we saw this week the first kind of major public corruption case brought by the new, not that new anymore, U.S. Attorney Ken Polite. There's been some grumbling here and there that there hasn't been as much public corruption investigating done during this guy's tenure, and I don't know that there's really any evidence of that, but there's just been kind of a lull in these sort of cases, and we had a real spike in them under Jim Letton and even continuing under the interim U.S. Attorney. So this was the first sort of big case that Ken Polite has announced, and it was a school board member, Orleans Parish School Board member Ira Thomas, who was accused. It's a relatively small, probably the smallest bribe I've ever seen prosecuted here, but $5,000 that was given to him. It was actually passed through an intermediary, so he didn't even get the entire $5,000. He had to split it with an intermediary. It was masked as a campaign contribution, but it was really a bribe in order to help this contractor get a contract. And as far as we know, we're pretty sure there was no contract ever awarded, but he did take the money. It was billed as a campaign contribution, but he never put it in his campaign account.
He did plead not guilty to it in his first appearance.
He did, but we're told he's going to plead guilty, and he's cooperating. And I think the evidence is pretty strong against him. This is like a sting operation where the witness who set this all in motion was willing to be videotaped and audio taped. So I think that evidence is pretty damning, and that's why you saw him. That's why you're going to see him take a deal.
Let's move on to St. Tammany now.
Sure. So another thing that we've all been watching for many months now is the grand jury investigation into Walter Reed, the longtime former district attorney in St. Tammany and Washington parishes. And that has been a very broad investigation looking at a lot of different things, and it appears to be getting close to fruition. Real briefly, they're looking in kind of 4 areas that we know about. One is a contract that he had with the hospital up there, in which he sent an employee. He was being paid privately to do this work, but it occasionally sent an assistant district attorney in his place, and thereby sort of profited privately from that. A similar potential arrangement with the Causeway. They're also looking at the misuse of campaign contributions. And on top of all that, looking at whether he lied on his tax returns, either tax evasion or filing false tax returns might be.
And then briefly also, if you could touch on some other indictments that were handed down.
Sure. In addition to all that, Walter Reed's brother, Richard Reed, was indicted this week in sort of a bizarre case in which he was accused of groping this intoxicated woman in a Covington bar, and then putting her in his car and saying he was going to take her home. She didn't really know who he was, apparently, and he didn't even know her whole name. And then when the police pulled him over because someone had called to report this, he allegedly tried to get out of it by flashing a badge showing he was associated with the DA's office. And then on top of all that, allegedly when she was brought to the police office, at the police headquarters to sober up, he was hanging around saying, "Oh, I'm going to take her home." And
so the indictment is on what charge?
The indictment is on. There's a sexual battery charge. There's a kidnapping charge. There's a charge of intimidating or impeding a witness, and there's a fourth charge that I can't recall at the moment.
And then also the former coroner, Peter Galvin, who's serving time in prison right now, a couple of his associates.
Right, a couple of the people who were sort of implicated in minor roles in his charge, when he was charged 2 years ago, they were indicted this week by a state grand jury that was based on that same investigation, and essentially they're charged with helping him steal.
So, whereas the U.S. Attorney's Office has been rather quiet on public corruption, the AG's office, which is handling both the Reed case, the Reed's brother, as well as in St. Bernard Parish,
and St.
Dave
Peralta.
They've been very active on public corruption.
Okay, well, we have to now move on to another segment. Errol, did you want to say something?
Okay.
Add something here? And over to Mike, and talk about wrongful conviction and imprisonment. You did a piece on a man who served 30 years on death row and was let go.
He was let go because he was innocent. It's a tragic story on many levels. His name is Glenn Ford. He was arrested in a 1983 robbery and murder of a jewelry shop owner in Shreveport. And it all came about when he actually went to the police trying to help them after he heard about the killing, because he had pawned some items that were eventually traced back to the victim. Instead of using that information and building a case against someone who had been a suspect in the killing, they zeroed in on him. And they cobbled together, which by today's standards would be considered a very weak case. But the trial was a sham. He was appointed civil attorneys with no experience, and certainly no experience in a capital case. Convicted, 30 years on death row. Eventually, new evidence surfaced that actually pointed once again to the suspect that was originally in the crosshairs of the Shreveport police. Freed Glenn Ford. He walked out 1 year ago. Now, the additional tragedy is that he has applied for compensation as an exonerated inmate. It's a program that the state has where exonerated defendants can collect up to $250,000, $25,000 a year for 10 years, plus an additional $80,000 for lost opportunity. He was in for 30 years, way beyond the cap. That would make him eligible, except in this case, it's been opposed now by the state attorney general's office. So he has attorneys in court that are now filing motions, and the AG is filing opposing motions.
But the prosecutors actually wanted this man released, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So they say he's not guilty.
The motion for his release came from the prosecutors with the Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office. And in rather rare instance, this wasn't where a judge ruled in a contested case. They actually uncovered the evidence. They really want to build the case against who they say is the actual killer. They filed the motion, but another prosecutorial office, the AG, is blocking him on the compensation claim. Now, add an additional and perhaps even graver level of tragedy. Glenn Ford is dying of cancer. His prognosis is rather bleak. It's lung cancer that has now spread.
So, but I need to get you to why. Why are they denying this money to this man?
Because of the pawned items. And, you know, there's a cruel irony in that he'd go into the police about the pawned items. He actually tried to get it into his trial as part of his alibi. That was denied. Well, now the, you know, Caddo Sheriff's Office wants to use that as they build a case against who they say is the actual killer. It's being used by the AG against him,
this man.
stating in their opposition that he does not have clean hands.
And it's not proven factual innocence.
Right.
Which someone who is
and of course,
exonerated needs to do.
proving factual innocence, that might be a little problem with the state's compensation law. Other states are actually more liberal, and certainly more liberal interpretation, but it forces somebody like Glenn Ford to prove a negative, to actually go into court, and this is 30 years old.
Yeah.
It's 30 years old.
So after serving 30 years in prison, in solitary confinement, also in death row,
Essential solitary confinement.
he's
yes.
still waging a battle, a legal
In
battle.
court, he will not presumably, you know, live to see the end of it. But you know, he's kept incredible grace and dignity, you know, through the process.
Mike, I know you've seen several of these kind of cases. Does it happen, though, that a person who was wrongfully convicted, that there was something that at least usually they were kind of close to the crime?
Every case is different. There are such a small number, you know, of cases, even in Louisiana, you know, a death penalty state, where capital punishment is given, that each case has its own individual circumstances. There have been, you know, people who have been found not guilty, but not proven innocent. Glenn Ford is a case where, for all intents and purposes, he has been proven innocent by virtue of new evidence, but now he has to go show that in court
So his
in opposition to the AG who wants to fight him on it.
So his battle continues as well as the battle against cancer.
That's correct.
All right, Mike, thanks. Okay, something that certainly got the town buzzing this week, Saints and what they're doing. And Jimmy Graham is gone, and we have other ones coming, and others are going. So what's
The
happening?
merchandise shops are going to be doing some big business, both
Clearance
buying
sales,
and selling, right? A
Well,
lot
the
of
shops need to wait until all the dust settles.
Right, a lot of
Who's on the
number
team
80
these days?
jerseys going on the sales rack this week. Yeah, shocking trade. I don't think the New Orleans Saints went into this offseason saying we've got to trade this person. Jimmy Graham's certainly not one of them. But I do think they went into this offseason saying we need to shake things up. We need to weed our garden, if you will. And Jimmy Graham's name came up in a trade discussion with the Seattle Seahawks, and they felt like it was a deal that they were willing to make. I would say it's probably the most shocking trade since the Ricky Williams trade, for sure, that Mike Ditka executed. Jimmy Graham is a player in his prime. He's 28 years old. He's a multi-Pro Bowler, easily one of the top 2 tight ends in the league. You just don't give up players like that. But they felt like that they had to maybe take a step back to take 2 steps forward. And I think they've come to the realization after some, really soul searching in this offseason that they had to do something to shake this team up because they were not as good as they thought they were, nor any of us thought they were last season. I don't think that 7-9 sat well with Sean Payton or Mickey Loomis.
And Graham's season wasn't that great, was it?
Well, he was injured. In his defense, I mean, he played. A lot of people told me he shouldn't even been playing. His shoulder was so injured. His collarbone was displaced. So I really think that his numbers tailed off, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that because his numbers leading up to that were incredible. But they haven't stopped with Jimmy Graham. They've made more trades today. They've made trades throughout the week. They've cut players, veteran players. No one seems safe except for, I think, Drew Brees right now. I think the fans, just by and large, welcome this. I think they were very frustrated last season, especially with the responses that we got from the team. There was a sense of dismissiveness, I should say. When asked about what's wrong with the team, it was, hey, we know the formula for winning here. We've got the guys in the locker room to fix it. Well, clearly they don't, and they're going about fixing it now.
Well, it seems like salary cap and leadership are really big concerns here while they're making these moves.
That's another big undercurrent is fixing this locker room. They had some real leadership issues on the defensive side of the ball. Almost every player they brought in, if you check his background, is a very strong leader, a guy that's going to keep his teammates accountable. And I think that's something Sean Payton definitely wanted to accomplish.
Does Breeze's salary create a problem with salary cap, and that it is so high that every season it's driving the salary cap up?
Well, it's the way it's structured more than anything else. But there's no doubt when you start paying an elite quarterback in the NFL, you've got to have a plan to build around him. And one of the key plans in the free agent era and in the salary cap era is you've got to draft well, because it's cheap labor, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's guys on rookie contracts.
That's the second contract that you worry about.
And the Saints have a lot of players on their second contracts, but they also have been forced to go out in free agency and sign a lot of free agent players that were very expensive, and they're paying the price right now for not having backups ready to go so they can move on from that. They have not drafted well, and they have not structured a lot of these contracts well.
So Jeff, why suddenly the Saints front office is willing to make such bold moves? Every year in the offseason, they chip around the edges, but all of a sudden now we're looking at a major overhaul.
I think they came to the realization they weren't going to get better any other way than to just kind of blow it up, if you will.
More changes to come?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, it might be going on right now.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. And talking about money, budget, the state, of course, is facing a huge budget crunch. And what's the latest on it?
Well, there's not been a lot of new movement since Bobby Jindal unveiled his plan to reduce the deficit through a variety of means, including most controversially getting rid of this large inventory tax credit that's paid by businesses that has business really in a lather, and I think they're moving to kill that plan. So where we stand is the legislature's looking this over. I think, one of the questions is how did we get here? And Bobby Jindal published an op-ed that was widely noticed in USA Today last week, in which he said, things have never been better in Louisiana, the economy is going great guns, so on and so forth. And he kind of left out where things stand as far as balancing the books. And I think what the experience of the last few years shows is that the Jindal plan was kind of to cut taxes and grow the private sector, and then you would see all this revenue come in. And some of the private sector growth may have in fact happened, but the sort of supply side view that all this money was then going to come pouring in hasn't really happened. And so what you see over the last few years is that revenue coming into the state, tax revenue, has fallen pretty steeply, and we just have a big disconnect between and he hasn't made cuts. He's made a fair number of cuts, but he hasn't made cuts large enough to offset what's coming in. So really it's like just failing to balance your checkbook. And it's been, there's other factors. We've had a little recession. There's oil prices have had some role in this, but really the biggest thing is that we've had some big tax cuts, and also a big expansion of tax credits and giveaways, and the revenues just aren't nearly big enough to match the expenses.
Gordon, whenever there's this discussion, people always mention the movie tax credits, because that's a popular topic.
Right.
Just this past week, a guy in eastern New Orleans opened what they call the region's largest movie studio.
Yes,
so
works.
at the same time, we have these people building a movie infrastructure out there and opening these huge studios. So will people politically be able to come back and say, we're dramatically changing the tax credits?
Well, I mean, the film tax credit, of course, is just one of the programs, and it might be the most controversial one just because it's had a lot of fraud, and there's been a lot of questions beyond the fraud about whether we get a bang for our buck on that. I mean, I don't know that the state is obligated to continue this program forever. I applaud this guy for investing in New Orleans East, but I'm not sure that the state should therefore be on the hook to just continue this movie subsidy program forever. I mean, I think the state needs to take a hard look at this and say, are we getting are we getting a real return for this investment, or are we giving away too much money?
And Gordon, isn't there a middle ground somewhere? It's not all or nothing. Aren't there some ways to maybe pare down?
I mean, there's lots of things you could do. You could, we essentially underwrite 30% of every movie made here, and up to 35%, depending on how much local labor they use. And yeah, you could cut that back to 25% or 20%. You could do a lot of different things. Now, the movie folks will say, the minute you start rolling it back, then all the movie people go somewhere else that has a better incentive than we have.
But we're going to see some legislation proposing a change, right?
Yes, there's been legislation legislation proposed, I mean, the changes I would say are relatively modest. They put a cap on the program, but the cap is higher than what we've ever spent up till now. So it's sort of setting a limit, but it's a limit bigger than we've ever reached. Yeah. There's also some probably good ideas in there about doing a better job of auditing the program so that you don't have as much corruption and fraud and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. And quickly over to Jeff right now. A quick word on the Pelicans, because we're just about out of time, but we got to see something about the Pelicans.
Everybody's forgotten about. They've been so overshadowed.
Yes, I know, and they're really doing good.
Right, they've made this great run into the playoffs. They're playing their best basketball of the season, despite having 2 key players out. They've won 7 of 9 games, and they're right now, as we speak, have the number 8 seed. Of course, there's still 18 more games to play, but they're in a 2-team race for the number 8 seed for the playoffs, along with Oklahoma City. I think most people believe Oklahoma City has the inside track, but I'm starting to believe more and more in this team, the way they're playing.
They're playing really well.
Yeah, they're getting down by double digits in almost every game and coming back to win. And I think they're
and doing it on the road. On the road,
right? There's some things they haven't done before. This team's obviously learning, and the patience that Monty Williams and Dell Demps have shown with this team is paying off, because they are coming around. They're learning how to win these games that they were losing early in the season.
They're winning without key players a lot of times too,
right,
which is impressive.
And I do think that even if they fall short, I think they've shown enough, unless we see a complete tank job here down the stretch, that they're going to keep this leadership team of Dell Demps and Monty Williams intact, because I think what they wanted to see was them just remain competitive.
And also, of course, we're seeing the budding superstar of Anthony Davis. He's not just putting up monster numbers, but he's taking over at the end of games, winning games.
He's stepped right into the man role very, very seamlessly, and it's clearly his team now.
Well, we need him to stay healthy and in that role, too. And good luck to the Pelicans. Okay, time to look ahead. Errol.
we've been talking about the state elections later this year, also some key parish elections, and in Jefferson Parish, including parish president, because John Young is term limited, will be running for lieutenant governor. Eldon Lagasse, who's a longtime fixture on the council, has announced that he's going to run, and it looks like to expect next week Kenner Mayor Mike Ennie will probably be announcing also. So we're starting to see the politics build up in Jefferson Parish.
Okay, Errol, thanks. Gordon.
Well, I'm going to say that I think things are going to dry out finally next week, but in spite of that, I think we should be expecting a high river coming in the next few weeks because of all the snow in the northeast.
Yeah. Okay, Gordon. Thanks. Jeff.
I want people to mark this on their calendar, March 21st, so it's a little ways off. But a week from Saturday, Steve Gleason's having a 38th birthday party. It's a fundraiser for Team Gleason. $150 a person, but Scott Fujita, some other Saints players will be there, and members of Jimmy Buffett's band playing. It's going to be a great cause.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeff. Mike.
Yeah, I just want to point out about 2 months ago on this very show, looking forward, I predicted that the Pelicans would be competing for that 8th playoff seed, and that's now come true. But next week, still in sports, but in a different way, we have Darren Sharper in Los Angeles going to court there, which could be for the last time in LA before he's extradited here to New Orleans.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here, and thank you guys for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.